This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Israeli officials are investigating an airstrike that reportedly killed dozens of people in the Gaza Strip on Sunday. This comes as Israel continues its controversial ground operations in Rafah, which it says is the final stronghold of Hamas terrorists. NTD's Jason Perry has the details.
On Sunday night, screams were heard as firefighters tried to put out a deadly fire in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. The fire allegedly started after an Israeli airstrike hit the area. And according to the Hamas-run health ministry, the strike killed at least 35 people. Residents searched through the ashes for their belongings on Monday.
We set up our tents and stayed, but there is no safe area here in the Gaza Strip. The place where we stayed was targeted. They killed our children and burned our women and elders inside the so-called safe area.
And an Israeli government spokesperson on Monday commented on the strike.
According to initial reports, a fire broke out after the attack. These terrorists were hiding underground, and it would appear that there were civilian casualties. We're looking into this. I will say that it was definitely grave. Any loss of life, civilian life, is grave.
And after an initial review, Israel's prime minister said that unfortunately something went tragically wrong.
We are investigating the incident and will reach conclusions because this is our policy. For us, every non-combatant who is hurt is a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy. This is the whole difference.
And more investigations have been opened up after a reported firefight between Israeli and Egyptian soldiers on the Rafah border crossing. Egypt's military confirmed that a member of Egypt's security forces was killed in the exchange of gunfire. Israel's top military prosecutor said they have now opened 70 investigations into possible criminal incidents. Also over the weekend, Hamas terrorists released a video claiming to show rockets being fired at Tel Aviv. The Israeli military said 8 projectiles were identified crossing from the Rafah area and that there were no casualties. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The presidents of both Russia and Ukraine are on foreign state visits today. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskyy signed a $1 billion arms deal with Spain. Russia, meanwhile, is set to build a nuclear power plant in a former Soviet republic. NTD's Virginia Gibson has the details.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy signed a $1 billion arms deal with Spain's Prime Minister on Monday. Spain will reportedly send Ukraine a dozen U.S.-made Patriot anti-aircraft missiles and 19 second-hand German tanks. That's according to Spanish newspaper El País. The Spanish government didn't confirm the reports. Zelenskyy used Monday's setting to describe the scale of Russia's assault.
Russia uses over 3,000 guided aerial bombs against people per month. We think it could be 3,500 next month, 3,200 this month. Thousands of aerial bombs are raining down on people's heads.
Zelenskyy says Spain doesn't actually have enough air defense systems to fulfill Ukraine's demands. He's now calling for more support from other nations.
We need to put pressure on our partners to give us the opportunity to defend ourselves.
Zelenskyy is also scheduled to visit the Portuguese capital of Lisbon. He will meet the Prime Minister and the President on Tuesday. Zelenskyy is expected to sign a similar 10-year agreement with Portugal. Russian President Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, met with the president of Uzbekistan on Monday. It's Putin's third foreign trip since his re-election in March. He previously visited China and Belarus. The talks between Putin and his Uzbekistani counterpart focused on increasing energy production.
The protocol, signed today, introduces amendments into the 2018 agreement, which allows us to construct a small nuclear power plant in Uzbekistan in line with modern Russian technology.
The nuclear plant would be the first such project in post-Soviet Central Asia. There are no nuclear power plants in any of the 5 former Soviet republics in the region. This as attacks continue on Ukrainian soil. 3 people were killed and 6 wounded in the south of the country on Monday. Both Putin and Zelenskyy have recently suggested they seek to end the war. Zelenskyy is inviting President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping to join a peace summit in Switzerland next month. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Officials say thousands could be buried alive by the massive landslide in Papua New Guinea last week. Treacherous terrain and the difficulty of getting aid to the site raise the risk few survivors will be found. Here's the story.
More than 2,000 people could be buried alive by a massive landslide in Papua New Guinea last week. That's according to a new figure by the National Disaster Center on Sunday, which was released publicly by the United Nations on Monday. Evit Kambu says she lost 18 family members.
I have 18 of my family members buried under the debris and soil that I'm standing on, and a lot more family members in the village I cannot count. I am the landowner here. Thank you to all of those who have come to help us, but I cannot retrieve the bodies, so I'm standing here helplessly.
Estimates of those killed in the landslide around the Yambali village in the country's north have been rising steadily since Friday. Local media on Monday reported that residents had rescued a couple trapped under rubble after hearing their cries for help. But treacherous terrain in the remote location raises the risk that few further survivors will be found. A UN official said the first excavator did not reach the site till late on Sunday, more than 2 days after the landslide. And nearby tribal warfare, which killed at least 8 people on Saturday, has forced aid workers to lodge nearly 40 miles away, rather than staying closer to the site, which has further hampered relief efforts. More than 72 hours after the landslide, residents are still using spades, sticks, and their bare hands to try and shift the debris and reach any survivors. 6 bodies have been retrieved so far. CARE International estimates 4,000 people were living near the affected area, but the population is difficult to determine, as the country's last credible census was in 2000, and many people live in remote mountainous villages.
Back in the U.S., severe storms continue to disrupt Memorial Day plans today. Over 120 million Americans are facing severe weather threats. At least 21 people were killed when powerful storms and tornadoes tore through Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas over the weekend. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has the update.
Powerful storms and suspected tornadoes killed at least 20 people, including 4 children, overnight Saturday into Sunday. With at least 11 tornado reports recorded, aftermath images show piles of rubble, destroyed buildings, and damaged cars. A tornado in Cook County, Texas destroyed a gas station. Governor Greg Abbott said it was a miracle everyone made it out alive. More than a third of all Texas counties are under a disaster declaration. A likely tornado in Claremore, Oklahoma devastated a campground full of Memorial Day vacationers. Authorities say the weekend storms killed 8 people in Arkansas, 7 people in Texas, 2 in Oklahoma, and 1 in Kentucky. Arkansas and Kentucky governors have issued a state of emergency. Heavy wind and rain downed trees and power lines, knocking out power for over 600,000 people in a dozen states. President Biden sent condolences Sunday for the people killed and everyone affected. He also thanked first responders and emergency workers. The Storm Prediction Center says storms are moving east. Heavy rain, high winds, and large hail is forecast across parts of the East Coast today. Expected downpours are threatening Memorial Day plans along the mid-Atlantic to the northeast. Meanwhile, over 25 million people are under heat alerts in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. The heat index in South Texas could top 119 degrees. A heightened tornado watch impacting over 4.5 million people is in effect for parts of Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee. The National Weather Service advises people to stay alert and check the local forecast this Memorial Day. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
President Biden paying tribute to fallen soldiers as he stresses the need to protect democracy. That's as Trump denounces those he says are trying to destroy the country. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
President Biden at Arlington National Cemetery honoring troops who died fighting for America.
Our fallen heroes have brought us closer.
And stressing the need to protect democracy.
Every generation has to earn it, fight for it, defend it in battle between autocracy and democracy.
Democracy is a key theme in Biden's 2024 pitch. He's also touting his administration's work for veterans.
Last year, the VA delivered more benefits and processed more claims than ever in our history.
While Biden did not invoke his political rival, former President Trump, in a post this morning, wrote Happy Memorial Day to all, including those who are, quote, working so hard to destroy our once great country. Biden's campaign seized on that post, accusing Trump of posting a Memorial Day message with zero mention of fallen soldiers. That's despite Trump earlier posting this picture and calling on people to remember the fallen. According to NBC exit polls, Trump won 60% of veteran support in 2016 and 54% in 2020. Biden is seeking to highlight veterans issues in the coming weeks, including on a trip to France next week for D-Day anniversary. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
From marching bands to musical performances, one of the nation's largest Memorial Day parades kicks off in the heart of Washington, D.C. Citizens and veterans from across the country gather to honor American servicemen and women who lost their lives in the line of duty. NTD's Sam Wong has more.
Floats and marching band taking over Constitution Avenue, bring a full slate of patriotic tunes to the heart of the nation's capital. Spectators stopping by along the sidewalk, cheering on as the parade makes its way down the street.
Memorial Day is when we honor those who have fallen as an ultimate sacrifice to our country. It's a solemn holiday. We celebrate the victory over the grave and the victory of freedom for all mankind.
For many years, Memorial Day was widely referred to as Decoration Day. Its inception traces all the way back to the years after the Civil War, and it didn't become a federal holiday until 1971. From parades to marching band to wreath-laying ceremony, Memorial Day is observed and celebrated annually on the last Monday in May. To many Americans, it's a day of remembrance of those who paid the ultimate sacrifices while serving the country. It also marks the unofficial beginning of summer.
For me personally, there's no place I'd rather be than here in DC with all of these families of fallen. They do this every day. They feel this pain and this heartbreak every day. And so for us to be here and walk alongside them and truly honor and remember their fallen hero, we want to say their names and remember who they were and the sacrifice that they made.
To me personally, I recognize both my son, who served many missions in the United States Air Force, and he is now passed. And we're here to celebrate and honor him, as well as all the soldiers and sailors that I was with on my aircraft carrier in Vietnam. This visit to Washington, I've had 2 people see my veteran's hat and say, "Welcome home." And that is something I never heard when I came back 50 years ago.
We're here on Constitution Avenue, right across the street from the National Archives. Right now, clouds are gathering above us, but rain or shine, the celebration carries on. Citizens from across the United States plan to honor the fallen for many years to come. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Sam Wong, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The Libertarian Party has its presidential candidate. Political activist Chase Oliver won the nomination over former President Trump and independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The Sunday vote took multiple rounds at the party's convention. Oliver reacted on X, saying there is no better unifying ticket in this party than this one. It's time to unify and move forward for liberty. The 38-year-old previously ran for a Senate seat in Georgia in 2022, receiving 2% of the vote. His campaign website calls for major cuts to the federal budget and balancing the budget. He also advocates for the abolition of the death penalty, the closure of all overseas military bases, and ending military support to Israel and Ukraine. What role will the Libertarian Party and its candidate play in the November election? Earlier, we spoke to Jeffrey Tucker, founder and president of Brownstone Institute and senior columnist for the Epoch Times, about the Libertarian National Convention. Jeffrey Tucker, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Sure.
To begin, RFK Jr. has been moving up in the polls, potentially making it to the June presidential debate. He's already met the polling requirements in 3 polls so far. He has until June 20th to qualify for a 4th. Now, how likely are we to see RFK Jr. on that debate stage alongside Trump and Biden?
It's seeming increasingly likely. It's good to kind of roll back in time and remember that he didn't want to be a third-party candidate. He wanted to be the Democratic nominee, and he assumed that they would have a fair fight going into the nomination process, like you might expect in a democratic system. But it didn't happen, and so the Biden forces just locked down the entire party and said, no, I'm sorry, this is your nominee, and he couldn't understand it. His initial campaign was he was going to be a Kennedy Democrat, and he was campaigning for the nomination, but he wasn't even given a chance, and now he's even being denied Secret Service protection. So he went third party just because he feels an obligation to the country. He feels a sense of obligation to his family history, a sense of destiny, maybe, that he needs to at least do the best he can to save the country. So, that's God bless him, But third parties are tough in the United States because we have a winner-take-all system, and by logic, those tend to devolve to two parties only. So it's going to be difficult. He's made it harder for himself, even, with his third-party bid. On the other hand, he's polling very well. What that means in terms of strategic voting when people actually go to vote is another question. But his polls are looking very, very good. And he's certainly working for it and working very hard. If he gets in the debates, that would be a huge game changer, I would think, for the country. We've never had a lot of success with third parties in this country, but if anybody could do it, I think maybe RFK is the man.
Now, we did see Trump and RFK Jr. both speaking at the Libertarian Party convention, which nominated Chase Oliver as their 2024 presidential nominee. Now, what do you make of that move, but also how big is the voting bloc of the Libertarian Party?
The Libertarian Party is fundamentally dysfunctional, and I think that's not saying anything controversial. It's not a voting bloc at all. They've usually had, I think, at most maybe 2%. I mean, Trump said 3%. They would be thrilled with 3%. It usually is closer to 1%, actually. I never heard of this Chase Oliver before. But I looked him up. It turns out, after having gone out to the BLM riots and protested for getting rid of the police, which, okay, fine, that maybe you could justify that with a libertarian concern. But then a few months later, he's hiding out for Thanksgiving in 2020, bragging about how he's socially distancing and wearing a mask and not gathering with more than 10 people. He celebrated the businesses that impose vaccine mandates, which is to say that here we have the nominee of the Libertarian Party who went full in with the entire, totalitarian COVID controls. So how do you make sense of that? I can't make any sense of that. How did he get the nomination? It was one of those spoiler kind of things. The people who voted for him supported him because they didn't want the other dominant candidate, which represented a different faction of the party. So what's amazing about what we saw this weekend at the Libertarian Party is that they took the highest point in their entire history, where they had, probably where we had RFK and Trump both speaking for them, got more attention from the global media than they've ever had before, and had a real chance to exercise a great deal of, I would say, like cultural, ideological influence. And then they threw it all away by nominating a guy that it doesn't seem to have has at best superficial libertarian convictions, and didn't have the bravery even to stand up to things like vaccine mandates and lockdowns. So it's a tragic moment, I would say, for the Libertarian Party, and I think from this point now till November and for the duration, everybody can just forget thinking about the Libertarian Party. I don't think they're going to have any influence at all on the outcomes of the election.
And how could we see that play out in the November election, given that this group is, say, maybe 1%? Like, how is that going to feed into the results of the election?
So I think it's really important to distinguish between the people who have libertarian feelings about things, that they're suspicious of government, they just want to live and live and let live, don't steal my stuff, leave me alone, kind of Gadsden flag the American Patriots, that's a Libertarian Impulse. There's those people. Then you have the CAP-L Libertarian Party voting bloc, which has never been very big. So those are really different things. But if you do have libertarian instincts at this point, RFK and Trump are both vying for your vote. I think it's an important one. The last years of American life, and I don't want to limit it to the last four, but especially the last four. But going all the way back, I would say, to 2008 and before, the demand of the American people to be left alone, stop being taxed so heavily, stop being regulated so heavily, and to stop the advance of what some people would call the total state is a very popular feeling right now in the electorate. Obviously, Biden doesn't play into that at all, but RFK and Trump both do. So I think that was the real audience for their speeches. And it's all credit to the person who arranged this at the Libertarian Party. Her name is Angela McArdle, and she's the chairman of the party. And she was criticized very heavily for inviting these guys, but she invited Biden too. It was a brilliant decision. It got the party a lot of attention. They squandered it by nominating this person nobody's really ever heard of, and doesn't even hold libertarian views on many issues, and then allowing the libertarian leaning vote, which is a very popular position, to be split between RFK and Trump.
Jeffrey Tucker, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, such a pleasure. Thank you.
The New York criminal trial against former President Trump heads for closing arguments tomorrow after more than 4 weeks and nearly 24 witnesses. The jury will start deliberating as early as Wednesday. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards breaks down what we can expect.
In just one day, attorneys will make last attempts at convincing a New York jury to convict or acquit former President Trump. On Tuesday, prosecutors and defense lawyers will give closing arguments that are expected to last all day. Although the attorneys won't be presenting more evidence, they will emphasize key points they want to leave with the jury. Prosecutors will remind jurors of what they believe is the most compelling evidence. But for the defense, especially having called only 2 witnesses, this will be a key moment to present their own narrative. The case charges Trump with falsifying business records. The charges, which are misdemeanors, were elevated to a first-degree felony as Trump is also accused of engaging in another crime, although it's not named in the indictment. Judge Juan Merchan has rejected the defense's request that the jury be instructed to reach very specific findings. The prosecution throughout its case posed 3 possible crimes that Trump could have tried to cover up, including tax evasion, conspiracy, and campaign finance violation. How the judge interprets the law could influence the jury's decision. Judge Merchan will take about an hour giving jury instructions before deliberations begin on Wednesday. Their job is to determine the facts of this case and decide whether those actions violated the law. There's no time limit on how long the jury can take, but evaluating 34 counts of falsifying business records could take a while. To reach a verdict, all 12 jurors must agree that Trump is either guilty or not guilty for the judge to accept it. If the jury can't reach a consensus after several days, the defense might ask for a mistrial. While the judge will likely instruct the jury to keep trying, if they can't agree, he will have no choice but to declare a mistrial. On the other hand, if Trump is convicted, he could face up to 4 years in prison or probation and a hefty fine. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here's some of today's top headlines. Citizens and veterans from across the country gathered to honor fallen service members on Memorial Day. Washington, D.C. held one of the nation's largest Memorial Day parades. At least 20 people were killed when powerful storms and tornadoes tore through Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas over the weekend. A heightened tornado watch impacting over 4 million people was in effect for parts of Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, and Tennessee. In Papua New Guinea, more than 2,000 people are feared buried alive by a massive landslide. Treacherous terrain and the remote location made search and rescue efforts more difficult. Israeli officials are investigating an airstrike that reportedly killed 45 people in the city of Rafah. This came as Hamas terrorists claimed responsibility for launching rockets at Tel Aviv. Joining me now to discuss the latest in the war is Gerard Filitti, Senior Counsel at the Lawfare Project and Middle East Affairs Analyst. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. To begin, the IDF has launched an investigation into the airstrikes that killed at least 45 Palestinians and wounded hundreds, according to Gazan authorities. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu calling it a tragic mistake, but vowed never to wave the white flag of defeat despite pressure from all sides. What do you see as the impact of this latest tragedy on the Israel-Hamas war?
The impact is to continue putting pressure on the Israeli government, both from the United States and other Western countries, on Netanyahu to withdraw from Rafah, to cease the campaign that it's carrying out to defend Israel in Rafah, citing civilian casualties, civilian deaths, and now, as we've seen, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court issuing rulings essentially going after Israel. So all of this is a massive pressure campaign now on Israel to avoid further deaths by withdrawing forces and not being as aggressive in prosecuting the war.
And Gerard, some Palestinians in Gaza are saying there is no safe area there for civilians, and critics say it's impossible to avoid civilian casualties if the Rafah offensive continues. Now, how should Israel move forward to achieve its war objective, which is to eradicate Hamas and prevent such casualties? Is that even possible?
It's very difficult to prevent any civilian deaths in war, especially when Hamas uses civilians as human shields. They establish leadership structures within civilian communities. Last night's airstrike killed 2 senior members of Hamas who were headquartered within the civilian population. That's why we have so many civilian casualties, because we have terrorist leaders who hide among them, who use them for this destruction, who don't care about their lives. This war could be over the moment that Hamas surrenders. This war could be over the moment the Palestinian people turn over the perpetrators of the October 7 massacre. Yet, unfortunately, that's not happening, and Israel has to go and eliminate all the leadership structure from Hamas.
Reports say the White House is weighing whether this strike crossed President Biden's red line after he threatened to suspend offensive weapons to Israel, citing a humanitarian crisis in Rafah. Where do you see U.S.-Israel relations going from here?
U.S.-Israel relations are rocky. They've been rocky for a while, but ultimately we take President Biden at his word that the bond between the United States and its security commitment to Israel remains unshaken. And there is a realization, I think, that a lot of the propaganda that we're seeing from Hamas, inflated casualty figures, devastation and destruction, is not necessarily reflective of what's actually happening on the ground. Because the truth is, Israel is engaging a lot of non-civilians. It's engaging a lot of combatants. Hamas does not distinguish between civilian casualties and terrorists. According to Hamas, every dead person killed is a civilian, and that's simply not the case. So the United States knows this, our government knows this, and our commitment to Israel remains unchanged.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's address today was interrupted by heckling from the relatives of the remaining 125 hostages who shouted at him, "Bring them home now." In terms of a ceasefire and hostage release, Qatar now saying this latest Rafah strike could, quote, hinder such talks, which are set to resume tomorrow. What can we expect to see next in reaching a deal?
I don't think realistically there will be any deal for a hostage exchange in the near future. I think that died a few weeks ago when there was a very real possibility, but Hamas pulled away from the table and came back with conditions that were unacceptable, essentially wanting to release dead hostages for many hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. So right now, it does not look like there is any agreement for a ceasefire or hostage release in the near future. And Israel has to do the other thing, which is to go house to house, building to building, to secure the release of these hostages. It would be very simple and tragic, but Hamas has the opportunity to release these people unconditionally. They were taken in violation of humanitarian law, of international law, and yet are still being held.
Now, many in the international community believe that Hamas can't be defeated militarily. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think Hamas can be degraded to the point where it becomes irrelevant, but it's, as we have seen with America's experience in Iraq and Afghanistan and decades before that in Vietnam, it's not about winning militarily on the battlefield, it's about winning the peace. Israel needs to be prepared to come in and take preventive measures to make sure that Hamas does not establish itself again and that another terrorist group does not take its place. And that's really where the challenge lies. Militarily, Israel has done an amazing job degrading the capabilities of Hamas and destroying its leadership. But unless there is a long-term solution for peace and prosperity, groups like Hamas will always come back to fight.
Gerard Philides, Senior Counsel at the Lawfare Project and Middle East Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Leaders from China, Japan, and South Korea met for their first three-way talks in 4 years today in Seoul. Here's a closer look.
South Korean officials said that country President Yoon Suk-yeol, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will adopt a joint statement on 6 key areas, including economy and trade, science and technology, and people-to-people exchanges. The rare summit comes amid global tensions that have strained trade and security dialogues between East Asia's economic powerhouses. China and U.S.-allied South Korea and Japan are trying to manage rising distrust amid the rivalry between Beijing and Washington and tensions over democratically ruled Taiwan, which China claims as its own. Yoon and Kishida have charted a closer course with each other and to Washington, embarking on unprecedented three-way cooperation with the United States on military and other measures. In bilateral talks a day earlier, Li and Kishida discussed Taiwan and agreed to hold a new round of bilateral high-level economic dialogue. Yoon and the Chinese premier agreed to a diplomatic and security dialogue and to resume free trade talks. Yoon also asked China to play a constructive role with its partners in North Korea, which is expanding its nuclear weapons and missile arsenal in defiance of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Officials and diplomats from South Korea and Japan have set a low bar for the summit. They say it's uncertain whether there will be major announcements, but that the gathering will help the three countries reinvigorate their strained relations.
A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is in Taiwan. The group is meeting with Taiwan's new president and pledging support for the island. Congressman Michael McCall assured Taiwan that U.S. weapons are on their way.
Everyone here is an important force in friendship with Taiwan on the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee. I hope that with your support in the future, the U.S. Congress will pass legislation to help Taiwan strengthen its self-defense capabilities and increase exchanges and cooperation between Taiwan and the United States.
And without deterrence, Chairman Xi has bold and aggressive ambitions. And we just need to do everything we can to make it possible for him to see that the risk outweighs the reward, that the risk is just too high.
The U.S. delegation recognized the urgency of Taiwan's need for the weapons after Beijing launched military drills around the island soon after the new president's inauguration. New President Lai Ching-te said the visit shows firm support for the new administration as well as Taiwan's people. McCall said the U.S. would continue to support Taiwan no matter who wins the U.S. presidential election in November. The 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre is coming up on June 4th. Activities around the world remember the moment in history. NTD's Jason Blair went to an event in San Francisco and heard from attendees about why remembering this day is important to them.
So I'm here in Chinatown in San Francisco. A group of pro-democracy activists have gathered to commemorate the 35th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now they have signs posted with some information about the event, and they're also going to be cleaning the Goddess of Democracy statue to commemorate the victims from the massacre. On June 4th, 1989, an estimated thousands of pro-democracy protesters were killed by the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing.
Now we came here to clean the statue of democracy. We want to memorize who died for us, and we want to carry on, to continue to fight for the freedom and the democracy of China.
It's the 15th year this event has been held in San Francisco and is the first of 3 planned for the area.
I speak for
for the freedom and the democracy. I think this history shouldn't be forgot and recovered up.
One participant wants more people to know what the CCP did to the protesting students in 1989 and things the CCP is still doing today.
The Communist Party, the government in China, took our all property with no reason. They just took our all assets. So we don't have any place to complain about this. We can only to escape from China to be here.
The CCP maintains strict censorship in China of any mention or even allusion to the event or the date June 4th.
George Orwell, he writes in the book about 1984 and animal fair. It's actually is real world in China.
The Goddess of Democracy statue in San Francisco's Chinatown is a replica of the one pro-democracy students erected during the protest in 1989. Since then, it's been a symbol of standing up to the CCP and totalitarianism around the world.
Everyone should have the right to pursue the freedom and the democracy.
More events and vigils will be held around the world on and leading up to the official day of observation, which is June 4th. Jason Blair, NTD News.
Your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot to discuss on this Memorial Day, but we start with some sad news in basketball as Hall of Fame player turned broadcaster Bill Walton passed away. How much did he impact the game?
Well, I mean, as a player, he was probably one of the best college basketball players anyway. I mean, he led UCLA to a pair of national championships. He had that one national championship game as a junior where he hit 21 out of 22 shots against Memphis in the blowout win. Then he went to the NBA. He was named MVP in '78, just his fourth year in the league. Now, this is a year after he led the Trailblazers to still their only NBA title. Unfortunately, he missed 3 of the next 4 entire seasons with foot injuries. Really robbed him of his best years. He came back, though, at least temporarily anyway, as a bench player for the '86 Celtics, helped lead them to another NBA title. Then when he retired, he went into broadcasting, was great there too. I mean, he had this enthusiasm about him that viewers really loved to hear. He would wear those Grateful Dead t-shirts, the tie-dye t-shirts even. Definitely had a way of his own. Fans loved him for it. He was very successful at it too. Won an Emmy Award, was named one of the top 50 sportscasters of all time, so he'll definitely be missed.
Shifting gears to tennis now, Rafael Nadal lost in the first round of the French Open today. Now, he's missed a lot of time with injuries recently. Is there a feeling that he might retire soon?
You know, he has said this will probably be his last year until he hasn't quite committed to anything yet. This was definitely his quickest Open at the French Open, though he do a very tough draw in 4th-ranked Alexander Zverev. Now, he's committed to play the Laver Cup this fall. He's also open to play in the Olympics this summer. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll stay on tour, though, of course. I think the big question is where he's at physically, whether he thinks he can get back to his former level. No, he's missed most of the last year and a half with a hip injury. Of course, it takes time to return to form. He's also a few days away from turning 38 years old, and it's already tough competing against guys 10 years younger. Now, today was just his 4th loss in 116 career matches at the French Open. That's a pretty phenomenal win-loss record. He's won a record 14 titles there. I don't think anyone wanted to see him go out like this if this is his last time there, so hopefully he has one more hurrah in him.
Now over in baseball news, a major injury to one of their biggest stars as Ronald Acuna Jr. is out for the season with a torn ligament in his knee. What are Atlanta's chances without him?
You know, you wouldn't think they're better, but he actually suffered the same injury to his other knee 3 years ago, and Atlanta actually won the World Series title without him. Very unusual, but he's a tremendous hitter as well as one of the league's best base runners. Last season, he led the NL in steals, on base paths, plus hits and total bases. He was a unanimous MVP. This year, he had really yet to get it going, at least hitting-wise. Despite that, the Braves were in second place in the division, really, I would say mainly because of their pitching. I mean, Chris Sale is having quite a bounce-back season. I think some of their hitters are definitely going to have to pick up the pace, though, if they are going to get back to the postseason or even back to the World Series this year.
Tonight we have both an NBA and NHL playoff game. Now let's start in basketball though. What does Indiana have to do to get back in this series?
I mean, I don't know if they can. No team has ever come back from a 3-0 deficit to win a series. But actually, they could be up very easily. Could be up 2-1 in this series. They've held the lead in the final minute in 2 of these 3 games, and they somehow lost them both. Very unfortunate for them. This is actually very similar, of course, to the other series that's going on, Dallas and Minnesota. All 3 of those games have come down to the wire, but Dallas has taken all 3 of them. In any case, the Pacers are going to host Boston tonight for Game 4. They will be out without Tyrese Halliburton. Now, in the NHL, we've got Game 3 between the Oilers and Stars. The Oilers won Game 1 in double overtime thriller, lost Game 2 3-1. Now the winner of this series will play the winner of the Florida New York Rangers series in the Stanley Cup Finals.
A lot to look forward to. Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
A wall doesn't usually travel, but this Memorial Day, one wall did. And while most walls keep people out, this one brings people together. NTD's Bill Thomas checks in to tell us more.
On a cloudy day at Smith Park in the Southern California city of Pico Rivera, a half-scale model of the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. stands at the center of attention. For folks who can't visit the East Coast to see the original wall, one Los Angeles County group is bringing that wall to them.
38 years ago, this wall was erected in Washington, D.C., and a lot of people are not able to go to Washington, D.C. to see the wall. So this organization, the AV Wall organization, donates their time to bring this to cities around America, and we were fortunate enough to be chosen last year.
There's only one of 5 in the United States. This wall here is one on the West Coast.
It travels at least twice a year. Sometimes we've done 3 a year. We don't travel consistently because we are strictly a small volunteer group of people who do this out of the kindness of our hearts.
Building this wall was no easy task. It took time, effort, and money. Stacia tells us more.
This is a memorial that was created in the Antelope Valley, and it was by local citizens. Contributions came from our community, from our school children, from large corporations, and it took many, many more years than we ever imagined and many, many more dollars, but the wall was built and its initial display was in 2009, and since then it has traveled to many communities in Southern California.
Moving this wall from one location to another is no easy task, and it weighs in at close to 2 tons. It's solid, heavy, and expensive, but at the end of the day, it's all for a very good cause.
We've created relationships in every community that we go to because it's very healing for the family members to come and see this and know we haven't forgotten the sacrifice of their loved one.
George Palermo, a Vietnam War veteran who also works with the AV Wall organization, tells us what this wall means to him.
A traveling wall brought me home from Vietnam many years ago. And to be involved with this and be part of it is just heartwarming for me.
The wall also displays a number of images, and Palermo explains the significance of many of those markings.
The wall has different symbols on it. There's a diamond, there's a cross, and then there's a cross within the diamond. The diamond means that they were killed in action and their bodies were recovered. The cross means that they are missing in action.
On the wall, there are also 44 sets of brothers, 3 sets of fathers and sons, and 8 nurses. If you'd like to learn more about the mobile Vietnam Memorial Wall, simply visit the website avwall.org. Bill Thomas and Jimmy Ma, NTD News, Los Angeles.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.